Hello, listeners. I'm Layla Maghribi. Welcome to Third Culture Therapy, a podcast that explores the ways culture and heritage impact our mental and emotional well being. On today's episode, I'm joined by Nat Rustom, a clinical psychologist from Lebanon who is also the co founder of the Arab Psychedelic Society. It is a grassroots nonprofit organization whose aim is to advance decolonial and culturally rooted mental health care across Arab communities with a focus on integrating psychedelic assisted therapy and Indigenous practices into healing. Nat, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Layla, it's so good to be here. Thank you so much for, offering this opportunity to chat. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Thank you. Me too. Very excited to delve into the very exciting world of psychedelics. But before we go there, I wanted to ask you first, what drew you to mental health care and psychology in the first instance?
Growing up with in Lebanon with my own struggles and sort of being hyper aware of the health crisis at a fairly young age, I just knew I wanted to serve my community in a way that felt meaningful to me. And it was a mix of curiosity, personal experiences, and fascination with the human mind that naturally led me down this path. It was at the core, it was just this deep empathy for human suffering and for human pain.
How did your experience professionally and personally evolve after you went into the field? And how did that evolve to the point of incorporating and using psychedelics?
My first experience was with MDMA, and it sort of just came to me. I wasn't actively seeking it out, and I had first learned about psychedelics in high school in biology class, and they kept coming up in conversation. And then
Is this high school in Lebanon?
yeah, 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 it's in Lebanon. It seems shocking, but I don't know why. For some reason, throughout my education, there was that consistent theme of talking about psychedelics and learning about them, and it wasn't necessarily in a way to promote psychedelics. It was definitely from a harm reduction perspective, but it definitely piqued my curiosity. I started hearing more and more about them. It felt like they were calling me, and I had that natural curiosity and to explore. And so when I encountered MDMA, I knew I wanted to delve into that. And so my first experience was extremely, extremely intense.
When you're talking about experiencing MDMA in this context, you mean it in a therapeutic setting, or do you mean just engaging MDMA like
Yeah, it
however
was recreation. It
it
was a
was recreational?
Yeah, absolutely, but it wasn't in the context of a party or, a social gathering. It was with my friends. It was just, within community, and there was something about it that immediately brought the theme of healing and working through pain. I was going through a lot at the time, and if I were to tell people what I was going through, I think the advice would have been, "Don't do psychedelics." And this is not me advocating, like, this is not me telling people, "Go do psychedelics even when, things are dark for you." But in my case, it pulled that darkness out of me, and I ended up purging that night immediately, and, all of my friends were concerned, and I just looked up at them after I was done, and I said, "Wow, I think I just cleaned out everything that was toxic within me," and I meant it, spiritually, physically, mentally. It was all, you know, released.
Mm.
And so the next day, I felt myself stepping into a different version of myself, and I knew that this needed to be spread in my discipline. And back then, there wasn't a lot of research. The revival was still in its initial steps. There was not a lot of movement.
And you were already a psychologist at the time practicing?
No, I was a student. I was a psychology student. It was
Okay.
my first year of psychology
So from
from
the
the
beginning, you were in corporate, actually, from the beginning of your professional career and education, psychedelics came into the frame. So you kind of built those together.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
How was that possible, or what challenges did you face trying to incorporate something that is predominantly illegal, definitely is in Lebanon where you are. So, how were you able to still develop that curiosity and that understanding? And how did your tutors feel about that, if you even approached them about it? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I definitely approached them about it. Ever after that first experience, the overarching theme of my papers for school were on psychedelics. My instructors, my professors were very, very open to it. They didn't really necessarily see anything wrong with wanting to explore that or research that because it came from a science evidence-based perspective. I'm just exploring a therapeutic tool just as others would explore art and therapy or, other things. So I was lucky that the institutions that had me as a student were quite open and liberal in their thinking.
How did your own culture impact the way you processed it? Did you find any resistance within yourself that you had to work through, and or socially when you've come to speak with others around you about this?
My culture, identity, and heritage led me to explore psychedelics. Actually, in terms of my personal identity, I think I've always been someone who challenges norms in a sense, norms that didn't necessarily make sense to me. But I think psychedelics were what reshaped how I experienced my culture, identity, and heritage. Through them, I was able to reconcile my relationship with myself, with being Lebanese and Arab, with all the parts of me that I once thought were at odds with that identity. Psychedelics helped me strip away that shame that I grew up with, and instead, it allowed me to see the beauty of my people, of my land, and my heritage.
I'm intrigued by something you said just before that, which was that actually you said your culture drew you to psychedelics in a certain way. I felt like what you were saying was something inherent within the culture is actually open to that. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I just meant it was how I perceived my culture. I perceived my culture as being a culture that was very mystical. Like if I look back at our philosophies, our histories, our poetry, our traditions, our norms, there was something inherently, mystical and spiritual about it. I was taught culturally to be an explorer, to to not be afraid to face my pain and to find resilience within my struggles, and I think those are themes that are very, very prominent in the psychedelic experience, at least it was prominent in my psychedelic experience. I didn't see my culture as being at odds with that at all.
Have you heard of the silk hair wrap company Paradise Fold? I've been using their 100% silk double layered reversible wraps and turbans for years. And if you love your hair, I think you're really gonna love these too. Beautifully designed, snug, and luxurious, they're the ticket to hydrated, healthy, frizz-free hair. Third Culture Therapy podcast listeners get a special 10% discount on the Paradise Fold website with the code TCT10.
You yourself as a professional, you say that you take a culturally informed approach to clinical psychology. What does that mean in practice?
I think for me, a culturally informed approach means recognizing how culture, identity, and historical context shape mental health. Practically, it means adapting therapeutic methods to align people's lived realities rather than imposing Western frameworks that may not necessarily encapsulate the whole picture. But it's not just about being culturally informed, it's also about being culturally rooted. And the difference is that culturally rooted care goes beyond adaptation. It's about co-creating with communities methods that truly emerge from and align with their lived experiences. And decolonizing the space is essential. And decolonizing ourselves, it starts with decolonizing ourselves, our spirit, our minds, And it's about, giving different Arab communities the tools to heal within their own local cultural and spiritual context, which, healing cannot be extracted from that.
Why do you think it's difficult for Western psychologists and mental health practitioners to understand this?
I'm not sure why it's difficult for them to understand it. I don't want to generalize, say it's difficult for everyone to understand. I think a lot of Western psychologists have a very deep understanding of the necessity of having culturally rooted and culturally informed methods. I think Monica Williams has championed that in the West, and she's done a remarkable job at it. So in my experience, I've met responses of, "Oh, so, what does that mean that Western therapists can't work with these individuals?" Like, it sort of feels like it's a personal thing where I don't know if they might feel criticized over their, expertise and knowledge, but it's not to criticize, it's to point at a gap and say, well, if you do want to work with these populations, then you really need to get to know the culture, because it could cause more harm than good, not knowing their culture, not being informed. The slightest micro expression from a therapist can affect the client in many ways, and so it's very important to have the contextual knowledge that informs the person's experience. So, for example, people who are Arab and queer have a completely different experience from people who are Western and queer. And it's not to put the Western experience all in one box, because it is very diverse, but there's a lot of things that are not necessarily taken into consideration in the Western queer discourse, because it's just not part of the cultural or social expectations and norms, which for Arabs, it can very much be. Yeah.
Obviously, Arabs as a description it's a vast group. It's stretching over continents, backgrounds, life experiences. Do you think there is a universal Arabic experience or even personality that you have come across, certain themes that come across crop up? And what is the binding factor, do you think, that makes Arab diaspora like a target for your organization?
I do wanna start off by saying that the term Arab is not monolithic. There are definitely shared experiences, particularly around, for example, family dynamics, displacement, cultural narrative, norms, traditions, ways of relating, that make tailored approaches very meaningful. And so, as the Arab Psychedelic Society, we aim to create pathways that resonate culturally, even across diverse diasporic experiences. And I don't think there's like a singular Arab experience or a singular Arab diasporic experience. I think there's definitely a lot of commonalities which we can build on, but I think it's also very important to distinguish that even if we split them up regionally, so let's say we put North Africa, um, Sham, and Gulf together, and we work like that. I would say there's even differences within the regions. So, a Palestinian's needs might not be the same as a Lebanese person's needs, and not and same for goes for a Syrian person or a Jordanian person. And so it's very important to also go regionally and locally and localize that knowledge and localize the context of what we're talking about to each community. And so yeah, it's very important to not only tailor them to Arabs as a whole, but to really go down to the root and say, what do Sudanese people need? What do people, Algerian people need? What do Saudi Arabians need? And go from there. It is a very, very big role, and that's why we're a diverse team, and we are growing to become more and more diverse, and we're working actively to include voices from every corner of the Arab region, and that's why I was talking about cultural rootedness, learning from community who can teach us and can help us help them build.
Which kind of brings me to maybe more of the practicalities and mission of the Arab Psychedelic Society. What is that, and how, and what do you practically offer?
So for the Arab Psychedelic Society, our mission is decolonial and multi-layered. We focus on many different aspects on education, research, and training initiatives, cultural dialogue, community building, recovery of local wisdom. It's about bridging science and culture while creating access points for Arab communities. Our aim is really to become an institution that is for the people, by the people.
And then how do the psychedelics element, where does that come into play? Is this just, are you informing or also facilitating?
Yeah, so we are doing a bit of both. So there's definitely informing, there's definitely education initiatives. We are working on public awareness campaigns, risk reduction initiatives, workshops, courses that are tailored to practitioners and the community. So the Arab Psychedelic Society has a dual role or two populations that it's working with and that it needs to cater to. It's Arab practitioners and it's also Arab communities. And there's definitely a lot of education and dialogue and information that is being built, but at the same time, there's practical, facilitation. We're working on various retreats in legal settings. We're working on clinical or on hopefully establishing the first clinical trial soon. And so there is work with the medicine, but we're trying to do it in a legal and structured way.
Let's just do a very brief. How does it help trauma, and why does it help in ways that other therapies wouldn't?
Yeah, so I'm gonna give the example of MDMA assisted therapy. So MDMA has a very, very unique way of helping us resurface memories, and this has there's neurobiological data backing this up. So what happens on MDMA is that your brain is ready to resurface a lot of memories and a lot of traumatic memories, and so usually traumatic memories are very negatively charged and they're integrated in a negative and painful way in our psyche, in our mind. And what happens is during MDMA, there's this window of tolerance where these memories resurface, but our brain's at an optimal point of acceptance, lack of self judgment, and increased self love. And then we are able to kind of reconfigure that memory, look at it from so many different perspectives, reconfigure it and revalue it and rate it as more maybe of a neutral memory. Then it's properly reprocessed and reintegrated into our memory holding system. And in addition to that, psychedelics, especially MDMA, has a really good way of, making the participant feel safe, making them feel like they have agency over their experience. And in therapy, the approach is very non-directive and person-centered. So it follows the philosophy of the person themselves have their own inner healing intelligence within them. And they're actually the ones carrying themselves through the journey. The therapist, music, setting are just there for support.
Presumably, there's a bit more to it than just that, because A, they wouldn't need the training, and B, one may be tempted to say, "Oh, I'll just put on a nice playlist and take a bit of MDMA and hope that my very traumatic memories, dissipate
Right.
easily."
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for that. I don't want to minimize the role of the therapist in any way. The role of the therapist is very important. And usually in those types of therapies, we have two therapists. And so the role of the therapist is very important for preparation, integration, and during the session itself. So during the session itself, if the therapist is properly trained with the use of consensual therapeutic touch, that could go a long way for a client. Just holding the client's hand could
Mhm.
offer tremendous support for them in that experience. But what I mean by the therapist is just there for support, I mean that the therapist needs to there's this constant rechecking of your intuition and your instinct and seeing whether you're doing this because you think that your client needs support right now, but maybe in that moment they don't necessarily, they need you to just sit back. And so there's this constant rechecking yourself. Am I doing this because I feel the need to be there, or because I'm feeling their need for me to be there? And so the therapist has a huge, huge role, and it's one of the most important roles, but there's a lot of agency within the person's own process. There's been, for example, I can give examples of victims of sexual assault who have worked with a pair of therapists, a male and a female. And what's really interesting is seeing these in training was, the client would tell the male therapist, "Leave the room." "Okay, no, come back." "Okay, now you can sit. Now go to the corner." And the therapist would listen, and the therapist would comply and do what was asked. And that gave the client so much empowerment, because for once in her life, she had control over what goes around in her space. And
Wow.
MDMA gave her, that it made her inner healer able to speak, to vocalize that, and not be afraid to say it. And with the therapist complying and understanding her process, that combination led to a lot of breakthroughs afterwards and a huge change within the
Wow.
client. Yeah,
Wow, that's an incredible story and really a great example of the way the role of the therapist and the client and the medicine. And yeah, it just brings back this idea of really co-creating and it not being a hierarchical
absolutely.
or a dictated interaction.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what's meant by, person-centered. It's the client first. They're really the expert on their own experience, and, we bring the therapeutic and, psychedelic knowledge to support.
Hey, are you enjoying this episode? Well, let us know. In fact, better yet, let others know by sharing the show with them. Follow Third Culture Therapy Pod on Instagram, YouTube, and Substack, and listen to the show on all the usual channels. Now, where were we?
How, if at all, have you found clients from Arab backgrounds to experience it compared to those from non-Arab backgrounds that you dealt with?
So I think that I wanna start off by saying that I think there's definitely some kind of universal language and quality that psychedelics possess that transcends culture and speaks directly to the human experience. But, that being said, I've also noticed that intention, meaning making, content of the experience, and even the process of integration can often differ. There's this real yearning to remain in community and to prolong that connection within Arab communities. And for many in Arab communities, experiences are very deeply intertwined with spirituality, ancestry, and collective memory.
It's a very interesting space that you're occupying as a Arab Psychedelic Society. You're providing this information and this training to people who may be doing it in a setting that isn't, entirely legal, but you want to mitigate harm. So you're offering your experience, which is obviously very commendable and needed, but you are occupying a bit of a gray space in that sense. Have you ever received any pushback locally from anybody, whether it's officially or unofficially, i.e., officially, governmentally, or within members of the public who have found what you're doing or what you're preaching to be uncomfortable and unwelcome?
Well, so far we haven't really started working with community leaders per se. We've worked more with practitioners and clinicians, as we're trying to start with those populations because, like you said, a lot of people might seek out psychedelic experiences, and it's very important for them to then go back home and connect with therapists that are psychedelic informed at the very least. And so we've taken that approach first. In the future, we would like to work with community leaders, but the way we would be working with them is through education initiatives. And I don't think there's anything controversial about that. In terms of pushback or blowback, so far, honestly, with governments and ministries, we've had some, surprisingly positive openness. And because I think, our countries are aware of the mental health crisis, and they are well read on research. Not it might be that not everyone knows about psychedelic assisted therapy, but we found so far a lot of components in different countries to have knowledge. And ketamine therapy is legal and available in many countries. It's just not done in the psychedelic assisted therapy approach, and usually it's given by psychiatrists. And what we're trying to say is that, yes, this is great, but let's include talk therapy. Let's
Yeah.
include a therapist in there, because it's not the psychedelic itself that does the work. It's the whole process.
We've spoken a lot about MDMA and you just touched on ketamine. I feel like I want to draw attention to the elephant in the room, given that I'm centering culture and so are you. But neither of these two drugs are local or indigenous to the Arab world. Meanwhile, there are actually those plant medicine that with psychedelic properties that are, for example, the blue lotus and Syrian rue, also known as harmaline. So why isn't the Arab Psychedelic Society working to promote or to use those? And why the focus on MDMA?
I would start off by saying that we are definitely not promoting the use of psychedelics, but we are aware that psychedelics are being used, and so it's very important to kind of offer the tools to do this in a proper way that is safe. So our focus isn't necessarily on MDMA or ketamine, and one of our biggest goals is to start incorporating acacia, Syrian rue, blue lotus, and these plants that are indigenous to us. And we are working on initiatives to include them, in community gatherings. In Yeah, but this is coming soon. We haven't started, but I think we took the MDMA route because MDMA had a lot of research behind it. It it's really robustly backed up. But it's not just MDMA. I mean, we're working with psilocybin as well and other plants.
I was actually a little bit embarrassed to only have learned that there was something called Syrian rue after I'd done like ayahuasca a few times. Curious what your experience has been, given that you're on the ground and you have this network. Have you been able to find out more? And do you think there really is a future where, within this context, we could be looking at local plant medicine being revived and used among the population for their, for their mental, emotional well-being?
In the beginning, the journey was difficult. It is difficult to find this sort of information. I think it's very important to look through our books, to look through different indices throughout our history. From our religions, like the Abrahamic religions, to our social practices. But I think it's also very, very, very important to get on the ground and go talk to our elders, because they hold that knowledge. There's a lot of communities that still hold that knowledge, and they carry it with safety in mind. They do worry about maybe cultural extraction or things like that, and so it is kept safe. And so it's about really going on the ground and learning from them, learning from our poetry, learning from all of our writings, and seeing, looking into ethnomycology and ethnobotany, seeing what plants were here, what fungus was here. Okay, then what could these things have led to? What were the practices that were done, a century ago, and before that, and before that? And by following that timeline, there's so many instances of, if it's not psychedelics, it's an altered state of consciousness. I think there is a lot of knowledge, but it does take active effort to find it and to pull it all together. Now as for the future, yeah, it's I really would wish for that. I do see it happening. I mean, there's a huge, huge calling to, re-indigenize, to sort of go back to our roots, to decolonize. I see, people from my generation in Lebanon going out in the woods, learning about their plants, learning about their soil, learning about their environment. And that's how we dig up this knowledge. It's by being actively in connection with our land.
The knowledge about local plants and medicinal practices, is this part of the Arab Psychedelic Society's mission to gather and research?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of our highest priorities. And it doesn't just stop plant medicine or psychedelics. It's about more, even more general, like ancestral and indigenous embodiment practices, which, for example, could include breathwork, movement, dance, even the type of storytelling that we do. You know, what is called in modern therapy is somatic tracking. Um, is something that our elders just very naturally do through being connected to land and nature and through being in a collective. There's this sort of awareness and groundedness within themselves. And I think we can learn a lot from that. And I think it's very important to highlight that because, not everyone's going to be open to psychedelic experiences or that type of path. But I think there's other methods to or other tools in the healing tool belt that can be used to achieve similar goals.
Yeah.
And yeah.
What about for you? What do you take from the Lebanese culture for your own personal healing or your own professional practice?
Lebanese people are always excited to, talk to you, to like exchange, to kind of have conversation. And it taught me how important it is to bring that into the work, to kind of spark conversations, spark intimacy, not romantic, but spark intimacy between individuals in these contexts.
I love how you mentioned the idea of exchange, the knowledge sharing, the exchange of info. I feel you're right in Arab culture, and I don't think exclusively there, but
Yeah.
coming from that part of the world myself, it's seeing that that is so much a currency, an important currency that people value. Like I'm going to share info for you, and it makes sense historically. You needed information, you still do, to be able to know what you're doing. But there is this sense, and you'll know this, like any person, any Arab who's gone to any person a little bit older than them and asked and received a lot of unsolicited advice and information,
Yeah. Yeah.
and let's say you've asked one small question or mentioned a headache, and you will get the history of, Nurophene and paracetamol and like
Absolutely.
love. I was just mentioning that I had a headache, but okay. So, but there is this sense and this, I think, quite innate feeling of like, this is how we build understanding in a community that is like quite strong because we all need to have information that's going to help us. So what's next for the Arab Psychedelic Society? Where are you going? What are your plans? What particular projects are you hoping to launch in the future?
Yeah, big, big plans and so many, so many plans just to keep it sustainable and manageable. We're focusing on a few projects at a time just to make sure that we are doing each and every project in the most meticulous, thoughtful way. Right now, we're working on building more community involvement. So having different community initiatives, be it retreats, integration circles, local community events. In addition to that, we are working on a few different projects that would include research studies and clinical trials that we're really excited about. We are working on training a group of around 20 Arab therapists in MDMA assisted therapy in an experiential setting um,
Wow.
with a protocol out. So they would be sitting with the medicine themselves, and it will be in a group setting, and it's the first Arab study of its kind or initiative of its kind. And we're working with people who have been catalysts in making this move forward, incredible minds. And yeah, and hopefully we're looking to expand to other communities. I have a huge passion to work and create space for Arab, queer, and gender diverse individuals, and so that's definitely something I'm working on with some colleagues. We're very non-hierarchical, and so when you're a member of our community and you want to work on a project, we're here to support. We're here to give that structure and the possibility of making it happen. Anyone is welcome to be part of the Arab Psychedelic Society, you know, uh, especially if they're Arab, and we're working on building a structure for, allies or people who are not necessarily Arab, but do feel this calling to support and, help. But yeah, so for now, but we definitely encourage, person and community led initiatives.
What are your hopes for the use of psychedelic assisted therapies among Arab communities and in the Arab world? And what would you most like to see change in the way Arab communities talk about and relate to psychedelics?
I hope to see psychedelics being destigmatized and, discussed openly in some places, while in other contexts where there's less stigma or stigma is less of a barrier. I'd like to see us integrating our own cultural practices, our own plants, our own traditional knowledge in a trauma informed way, and just underline trauma informed way. It's very important it's very
Highly traumatized region, please
yes.
know that what you're doing.
Yeah, so it's for me, I would love to see community leaders, healers be really trained in trauma informed approaches, so that these these offerings, these practices can be offered, safely and respectfully, with attention to both the individual and the collective. My dream for this treatment, for this therapy, is for it to reach the most marginalized, the people who usually don't have access to these things, because that's the population that most likely needs it the most.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks so much, Nat, for
Yeah,
coming on the show and speaking to us about the Arab Psychedelic Society. It's great work that you're doing.
thank
I'm
you.
actually really excited to see where you go next and what the findings are going to be. I'm particularly keen to learn more about the indigenous plants and the way that they can be used. And it's a very exciting time to really co-create something that's very, very authentic and indigenous to people. And that's really very much the ethos of this show and yours. So thank you for sharing, and I wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It was so great to have this conversation with you and to have a platform to, speak of these very, very important things. Yeah, this was really nice, and yeah.
I would love it if you would like, follow, and review this episode. And please share it far and wide with friends, family, colleagues, the lot. Every little click from you helps elevate this podcast, allowing me to carry on producing great content for you.